When maintenance unlocked apartment 4B, the smell hit them first. Then the silence. Then the small body on the couch, still facing a television that had been running for 6 days straight. Noah Brooks was 3 years old. Paralyzed. Alone. His mother? 80 miles away, champagne in hand, laughing at a poolside bar with a man she'd met online just weeks before. 6 days of pleasure. 6 days of silence. One choice that ended a life. This is the story of Elena Brooks, a mother who chose a stranger over her son, a woman who traded love for lust, and a tragedy that asks one haunting question: how does devotion turn into abandonment? If stories like this shake you to your core but remind you why truth must never stay buried, hit that subscribe button. Join the witness wall. Because every voice deserves to be remembered. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The maintenance supervisor at Riverside Towers had seen worse. Flooded bathrooms. Hoarded apartments. Walls covered in mold that bloomed like death itself. But he had never smelled this. It seeped through the hallway on the 4th floor, thick and sweet and wrong. Residents had been complaining for 2 days. At first, management assumed it was trash. Someone forgot to take out the garbage before a long weekend. By the 3rd day, they knew better. Marcus Chen stood outside apartment 4B with a master key in his trembling hand. He knocked 3 times. No answer. He pressed his ear to the door and heard nothing but the faint hum of a television. He turned the key. The door swung open, and the smell hit him like a fist. He covered his mouth with his sleeve, eyes watering, and stepped inside. The apartment was dim. Curtains drawn. The only light came from a flat-screen TV playing cartoons, bright colors dancing across a room that had become a tomb. And there, slumped on the couch, was a small boy. Marcus didn't need to check for a pulse. He could see it in the way the child's head tilted. In the stillness of his chest, in the pale, waxy color of his skin. He stumbled backward, phone already in his hand, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "There's a child," he gasped into the receiver. "He's dead. I think he's been here for days." Police arrived within minutes. By the time Detective Raymond Cole stepped through the doorway, the scene had already been cordoned off. Officers stood in the hallway, faces pale, speaking in low voices. Raymond had worked homicide for 12 years. He'd seen bodies in bathtubs, in basements, in places no one should ever have to find them. But there was something about a child, something that stayed with you long after the case closed. He stepped into the apartment and immediately noticed the details. A half-empty bag of chips on the coffee table. A sippy cup lying on its side, contents long dried. The TV remote resting beside the boy's lifeless hand. "Where's the mother?" Raymond asked. One of the officers shook his head. "No sign of her. Neighbors say they haven't seen her in almost a week." Raymond's jaw tightened. He moved closer to the couch, his trained eyes scanning the scene. The boy couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 years old. His legs were thin, unnaturally still. Raymond recognized the signs: paralysis, likely from an accident or illness. This child couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't even crawl to the door to call for help. He'd been left here, abandoned. "Find her," Raymond said quietly, his voice hard as stone. "Find the mother. Now." Within an hour, they had a name: Elena Brooks, 35 years old. Single mother. No criminal record. Neighbors described her as devoted, always seen pushing Noah in his wheelchair, always smiling. But Elena Brooks wasn't home. And when they pinged her phone, the signal came back from a location 80 miles away, a luxury hotel on the coast. Booked under a name that wasn't hers. 7 months earlier, Elena Brooks was a different woman. She lived alone with her son Noah in apartment 4B, the same place where his life would later end. Back then it was filled with laughter. Toys scattered across the living room floor. Children's books stacked on the coffee table. A small wheelchair parked by the door. Noah had been paralyzed in a car accident when he was 2. A drunk driver ran a red light, T-boning Elena's sedan on the passenger side. She walked away with bruises. Noah never walked again. The guilt never left her. She quit her job as a dental assistant to care for him full-time. Insurance covered some of his medical expenses, but not all. She took odd jobs, remote data entry, online tutoring, anything she could do from home while Noah slept or watched his favorite cartoons. Her friends admired her. "You're so strong," they'd say. "I don't know how you do it." Elena would smile and shrug. "He's my son. What else would I do?" But inside, she was drowning. The isolation crept in slowly. Weeks would pass without adult conversation. Her social life evaporated. Dates were impossible. No man wanted to take on a single mother with a disabled child. Or so she told herself. At night, after Noah fell asleep, Elena would sit on the couch and scroll through her phone. She watched videos of people traveling, dancing, living lives that felt impossibly far away. She was 35 years old, and she felt like her life was already over. Neighbors often heard Noah's laughter through the walls. He was a bright, cheerful boy despite everything. He loved dinosaurs and superheroes. He'd wave at anyone who passed by, his smile so wide it could melt the hardest heart. Mrs. Alvarez, who lived next door, would sometimes bring over homemade cookies. "For the little prince," she'd say, ruffling Noah's hair. Elena would thank her, always polite, always gracious. But Mrs. Alvarez noticed something else too, the tiredness in Elena's eyes. The way her hands trembled when she poured coffee. The weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like a stone. "You need to take care of yourself too," Mrs. Alvarez told her once. Elena laughed it off. "I'm fine." "Really?" But she wasn't fine. She was exhausted. Lonely. Desperate for something, anything, to remind her she was still a woman, not just a caretaker. That desperation made her vulnerable. And vulnerability, as it turned out, was exactly what Trey Lawson hunted for. Elena met Trey on a Friday night in late February. She'd been scrolling through a dating app, something she'd downloaded weeks earlier but never had the courage to use. That night, after putting Noah to bed, she opened it, just to see if anyone out there might still find her interesting. Trey's profile caught her eye immediately. His photos showed a man in his mid-20s, lean and well-dressed. Sharp jawline. Confident smile. In one picture, he stood in front of a luxury car. In another, he held a glass of champagne at what looked like a rooftop party. His bio read, "Entrepreneur. Dream chaser. Life's too short to play it safe." Elena hesitated before swiping right. He was 10 years younger than her. Way out of her league. But before she could second-guess herself, her phone buzzed. "You have a match." Within minutes, Trey sent the first message. "You look like someone who's seen some things." "I like that." Elena stared at the screen, heart pounding. It had been so long since anyone flirted with her. Since anyone saw her as more than Noah's mom. They talked for hours that night. Trey was charming, attentive, funny. He asked about her life, listened to her complaints, made her feel seen. He told her about his businesses, vague descriptions of investments and startups that always seemed on the verge of taking off. He never asked about Noah. Not once. And Elena didn't bring him up. 2 weeks later, they met in person at a downtown bar. Elena had arranged for Mrs. Alvarez to watch Noah for a few hours, promising she'd be back before bedtime. Trey looked even better in person. He wore a tailored jacket, designer sneakers, cologne that smelled expensive. When he smiled at her, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years, desirable. They drank. They laughed. Trey told stories about his travels, his plans, his vision for a life free from constraints. He made everything sound possible. Exciting. You deserve more than what you have, he told her, his hand resting on hers. You know that, right? Elena's chest tightened. She did know. She'd felt it every day for months. I have responsibilities, she said quietly. Trey leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Responsibilities don't have to be chains. That night, Elena went home and stared at Noah sleeping in his bed. She kissed his forehead, guilt twisting in her stomach. But when her phone buzzed with a text from Trey, "Can't stop thinking about you," that guilt faded, replaced by something else. Possibility. Freedom. She texted back, "Me too." And just like that, the door opened to a man who would destroy everything. The change didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, like water seeping through cracks. At first, Elena still maintained her routines. Noah's doctor appointments were kept. Meals were prepared on time. Bedtime stories were read with the same gentle voice. But then Trey started calling more often. Texting during the day. Asking when he could see her again. Elena began making excuses. Small ones at first. "Mrs. Alvarez, could you watch Noah for an hour? I need to run an errand. Just one more night. I'll be home before he wakes up." The errands stretched into evenings. The evenings stretched into overnight stays. Trey would book cheap motels outside the city, places where they could disappear for a night. He paid for everything, or so it seemed. In reality, the credit cards he used were stolen, cycled through fake identities he'd built over years of scams. But Elena didn't know that. She only knew that for the first time in years, someone was treating her like she mattered. Noah's doctor appointments started getting missed. Elena would wake up the morning of a scheduled visit and realize she'd forgotten to set an alarm. Or Trey would call with plans that seemed too good to pass up. "I got us tickets to a concert tonight. Come on, live a little. He'll be fine. Kids are resilient." Bills began piling up on the kitchen counter. Electricity, water. Elena would glance at them and feel a surge of panic, then push it aside. She'd deal with it later. Tomorrow. Next week. Her friends started noticing. Texts went unanswered. Calls were declined. When they did reach her, Elena sounded distracted, distant. "Are you okay?" one friend asked. "You don't seem like yourself." "I'm great," Elena insisted. "Just figuring things out." Mrs. Alvarez noticed too. She'd see Elena leaving late at night, dressed up, makeup done. And the next morning, Noah would still be in the same clothes, sitting in his wheelchair by the window, waiting. "Where's your mama?" Mrs. Alvarez would ask gently. Noah would shrug, his small voice uncertain. She said she'd be back soon. But it soon became longer. And longer. Neighbors started hearing Noah cry at odd hours. Once, someone knocked on the door to check on him. Elena answered, irritated, Hair messy, eyes tired. He's fine. He just gets fussy sometimes. But Noah wasn't fine. He was being left alone for hours at a time, his basic needs barely met. His mother's attention, once unwavering, was now split and increasingly absent. Trey, meanwhile, was planting seeds. "You know what you need?" he'd say, lying beside her in some nameless motel. "A real break. Not just a night. A real getaway." Elena would laugh it off. "I can't. Noah needs me." "Does he?" Trey would ask, his tone casual but deliberate. "Or does he just need someone? It doesn't have to be you every second." Those words settled into Elena's mind like poison. Slowly, insidiously, they began to reshape her thinking. Maybe Trey was right. Maybe she'd been sacrificing too much. Maybe Noah would be fine for a little while without her. Maybe she deserved this. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-March when Trey made his pitch. Elena sat on his couch, another temporary apartment he'd sweet-talked his way into, scrolling through her phone. Noah had been fussy that morning, crying because she'd forgotten to give him his medication on time. She'd snapped at him, immediately felt guilty, then left him with the TV on while she went to see Trey. "I've been thinking," Trey said, sliding onto the couch beside her. "We should take a real trip. Just you and me. 6 days. The coast. The Sunday. No stress." Elena's stomach twisted. "I can't leave Noah for 6 days." "Why not?" Trey's hand rested on her knee, his voice smooth and persuasive. "He sleeps most of the day anyway, right? And you said your neighbor checks on him sometimes." "That's different. That's an hour or two, not..." "Not what?" Trey interrupted, his tone shifting slightly. "Not what you deserve. Elena, when's the last time you did something for yourself? When's the last time you felt alive?" Elena looked away, tears pricking her eyes. She hated how easily he could get to her. How he knew exactly what to say. "He's my son," she whispered. "And you're a person," Trey countered. "You can't pour from an empty cup. This trip, it's what you need. Then you'll come back refreshed, ready to be the mom he needs." Elena wanted to believe him. Desperately. What if something happens? Trey sighed, pulling out his phone. "I'll book it. If you change your mind at the last minute, we'll cancel. No pressure. But think about it. 6 days. Just us. One last trip before we start fresh." The phrase lingered, "start fresh." It sounded like a promise. Like a future. Elena closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw Noah's face, his wide, trusting eyes. His small hands reached for her. His laughter that used to fill their apartment. But she also saw herself. Exhausted. Alone. Disappearing. "Okay," she said quietly. Trey grinned, already typing on his phone. "You won't regret this." But Elena already did. The days leading up to the trip were a blur of guilt and rationalization. Elena told herself Noah would be fine. She left extra snacks on the coffee table, crackers, juice boxes, granola bars. She turned on his favorite cartoons and made sure the remote was within reach. She even propped his wheelchair close to the couch, though she knew he couldn't move himself into it. On the morning they left, Elena knelt beside Noah. He was half asleep, eyes heavy, as she brushed hair from his forehead. "Mama's going away for a little bit," she whispered. "But I'll be back soon. I promise." Noah stirred, his small voice groggy. "How long?" Elena's throat tightened. "Not long. You just sleep and watch your shows, okay? Be a good boy." She kissed his forehead, lingering for a moment longer than usual. Then she stood, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out the door. The lock clicked behind her, and Noah was alone. The hotel was everything Trey promised. White sand beaches, crystal blue water, a rooftop pool with a view that stretched for miles. Elena tried to enjoy it. She really did. The first day was a haze of champagne and sunlight. Trey rented jet skis. They ate seafood at an expensive restaurant. They danced at a beachside club, surrounded by people who looked like they'd never known hardship. Elena posted photos on social media, her in a sundress, smiling. Trey with his arm around her, both of them laughing. The captions were carefree. Living my best life. Finally free. But at night, when Trey fell asleep beside her, Elena would stare at the ceiling. Her phone sat on the nightstand, silent. She'd pick it up, open her messages, and stare at the last text she'd sent to Mrs. Alvarez. I'm going out of town for a few days. Can you check on Noah if you get a chance? Mrs. Alvarez had replied, Of course, honey. Have fun. But Mrs. Alvarez hadn't checked. She assumed Elena had arranged other care. Assumed someone else was watching the boy. Elena told herself Noah was fine. He had food. He had the TV. He was used to being alone for a few hours. 6 days was just longer. Back in apartment 4B, Noah woke on the first morning to silence. He called for his mother. No answer. He tried to move, but his legs wouldn't obey. They never did. He reached for the sippy cup on the table, but it was just out of reach. He whimpered, then cried, then eventually went quiet. The cartoons played on. Bright, cheerful, oblivious. By the second day, Noah's cries had weakened. The snacks his mother left were gone. The juice boxes drained. His small body, already frail, began to shut down. He didn't understand why she wasn't coming back. He didn't understand that she'd chosen not to. On the third day, neighbors knocked. They'd heard faint sounds, a child's voice, maybe crying. But the door was locked. And they assumed Elena was inside, just busy. By the fourth day, the sounds stopped. Noah lay on the couch, eyes half open, staring at the TV screen. His breathing was shallow. His lips cracked and dry. He whispered one last word, barely audible. Mama! Then silence. Meanwhile, 80 miles away, Elena laughed as Trey poured her another drink. They posed for more photos. She didn't check her phone. She didn't want to. Because somewhere deep down, beneath the alcohol and the denial, she knew. She knew what she'd done. On the sixth day, the smell became unbearable. Mrs. Alvarez was the first to notice. She stepped into the hallway and immediately recoiled, covering her nose. At first, she thought it was the trash chute. Then she realized it was coming from apartment 4B. She knocked on the door. Elena? Honey, are you home? No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Noah? Baby, can you hear me? Still nothing. Panic began to set in. Mrs. Alvarez hurried downstairs to the building manager's office, her heart pounding. Something's wrong, she said breathlessly. In 4B. You need to check. Now. The manager, a man named Rick, sighed. Probably just garbage. People forget to. It's not garbage, Mrs. Alvarez snapped. I know what garbage smells like. This is different. Please. Rick grabbed his keys and followed her upstairs. The closer they got to 4B, the worse the smell became. By the time they reached the door, Rick's face had gone pale. He unlocked the door. The smell hit them like a wall. Mrs. Alvarez gagged, stumbling backward. Rick covered his mouth with his shirt and stepped inside. The apartment was dim. Curtains drawn. The only light came from the TV, still playing cartoons. And there, on the couch, was Noah. Rick didn't need to go closer. He could see from the doorway that the boy was gone. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God." Mrs. Alvarez pushed past him, tears already streaming down her face. "No. No. Noah. Baby. No." Rick grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Don't touch anything. We need to call the police." Within minutes, the apartment was swarming with officers. Detective Raymond Cole arrived shortly after, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. He stood in the doorway, taking it all in. The snack wrappers. The dried juice on the table. The small, still body on the couch. A child. Paralyzed. Alone. Left to die. Raymond's jaw clenched. He'd seen evil before. But this was something else. "Where's the mother?" he asked, his voice cold. An officer approached with a tablet. "We pinged her phone. She's at a hotel. The Coastal Grand. About 80 miles from here." Raymond's eyes darkened. "Get a unit out there. Now." He turned back to the apartment, his gaze lingering on Noah. The boy's face was peaceful, almost like he was sleeping. But his small hands were curled into fists, as if he'd been holding on until the very end. Raymond crouched beside the couch, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, kid. I'm so sorry." Then he stood, his expression hardening. "Let's go get her." The Coastal Grand Hotel was the kind of place people went to forget their problems. Infinity pool. Open-air bars. Couples laughing over overpriced cocktails. Detective Raymond Cole pulled into the parking lot with 2 uniformed officers in tow. His phone buzzed with an update from the precinct. Surveillance footage confirmed Elena Brooks checked in 6 days ago under the name of a man identified as Trey Lawson. Raymond's grip on the steering wheel tightened. 6 days. The same amount of time her son had been dying alone. They found her by the pool. Elena sat on a lounge chair, sunglasses perched on her head, a half-empty margarita sweating on the table beside her. She wore a bright yellow bikini and a sheer cover-up that fluttered in the breeze. Her skin was tan. Her hair was loose and wavy. She looked happy. Raymond approached slowly, flanked by the officers. Around them, other guests began to notice, conversations quieting as they sensed something was wrong. "Elena Brooks?" Raymond said, his voice cutting through the lazy afternoon air. Elena turned, squinting up at him. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then recognition. Then fear. "Yes," she said cautiously, sitting up straighter. "Is something wrong?" Raymond's expression didn't change. "We need you to come with us. Now." Elena's eyes darted to the officers, then back to Raymond. "But what's going on? Where's your son, Miss Brooks?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Elena's face went pale. "Noah? He's at home. But what happened? Is he okay?" Raymond's voice dropped, cold and precise. "When's the last time you saw him?" Elena's hands began to shake. "I left him 6 days ago. But he's fine. I made sure he had everything he needed. 6 days, Raymond repeated, his tone razor-sharp. "You left a paralyzed 3-year-old alone for 6 days. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Miss Brooks, your son is dead." The world seemed to stop. Elena stared at Raymond, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and horror. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not, you're lying. He's fine. He's at home. He was found this morning, Raymond continued, his voice unrelenting. Alone. On your couch. He'd been dead for at least 2 days. Elena's legs gave out. She collapsed back onto the lounge chair, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half scream. No. This isn't happening. I thought. Raymond gestured to the officers. Take her in. As they moved to cuff her, Elena began to hyperventilate. Wait, please. You don't understand. I left food. I left the TV on. I thought someone would check. I thought. You thought wrong, Raymond said flatly. Guests around the pool stared in stunned silence as Elena was led away, her sobs echoing across the water. Trey, meanwhile, was nowhere to be found. When officers searched their hotel room, they discovered he'd checked out an hour earlier. Surveillance footage showed him leaving through a side exit, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his movements quick and deliberate. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known what was coming. And he'd run. But Raymond would find him. He always did. As Elena was loaded into the back of a patrol car, she turned one last time to look at the hotel, the place where she'd spent 6 days laughing, drinking, living, while her son died alone. The interrogation room was small and sterile. White walls. A metal table. 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Elena sat hunched over, her hands cuffed in front of her, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She hadn't stopped crying since they brought her in. Detective Raymond Cole sat across from her, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Beside him was his partner, Detective Lisa Tran, a woman known for her ability to read people like books. Ms. Brooks, Lisa began, her voice calm but firm. We need you to walk us through what happened. From the beginning. Elena shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear. I didn't know. Didn't know what? Raymond asked. That leaving a paralyzed child alone for 6 days would kill him? Elena flinched. I thought someone would check on him. Mrs. Alvarez. I texted her. I told her I'd be gone. Lisa leaned forward. You texted her and asked her to check on Noah. But you never followed up. You never called. You never verified that someone was actually with him. Elena's voice broke. I was going to. I got distracted. Raymond's jaw tightened. Distracted? By what? By the beach? The drinks? The man you were with? Elena buried her face in her hands. I know how it sounds. I know. But I'm not a monster. I love my son. Then why leave him? Lisa asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. Because I was drowning. Do you understand? I was drowning. Every day it was the same thing. Feeding him. Changing him. Watching him lie there, knowing he'd never walk again. Knowing it was my fault. Raymond's expression darkened. So you abandoned him? No. Elena shouted, her voice cracking. I needed a break. Just one break. Trey said. Trey, Lisa interrupted. Tell us about Trey. Elena's hands trembled. He made me feel alive again. Like I was more than just Noah's mom. He said I deserved happiness. That Noah would be fine. And you believed him, Raymond said, his tone dripping with contempt. Elena nodded miserably. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that just this once, I could do something for me. Lisa pulled out a phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a series of text messages between Elena and Trey. Trey, stop worrying. He's sleeping. We deserve this. Elena, I know. I just feel guilty. Trey, guilt is for people who have regrets. Do you regret being with me? Elena, no. Never. Lisa's voice was steady. You told him you felt guilty. And instead of going home, you stayed. Why? Elena stared at the messages, her face crumpling. Because I was scared. Scared that if I left, he'd leave me. And I couldn't. I couldn't go back to being alone. Raymond stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Your son died alone. While you partied. While you posted pictures. While you chose a con artist over your own child. Elena sobbed. I didn't know he'd die. I swear. I didn't know. You didn't care, Raymond shot back. That's the truth, isn't it? You didn't care enough to check. The room fell silent except for Elena's broken cries. Outside the interrogation room, officers whispered. The case was already making headlines. The photos from Elena's social media, her smiling, carefree, juxtaposed with the image of a small, lifeless boy. Public outrage was swift and brutal. But the case was far from over. Because Trey Lawson was still out there. And Detective Raymond Cole wasn't done yet. 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the gallery. Cameras lined the hallway outside. The story had captured national attention. A mother who abandoned her disabled son to party with a younger man. Elena sat at the defense table, thin and hollow-eyed. She'd lost weight in jail. Her hair, once styled and vibrant, hung limp around her face. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the room, the prosecution sat ready. District Attorney Marcus Reeves was a man known for his relentless pursuit of justice. He'd built his case meticulously, every piece of evidence designed to paint Elena as a selfish, negligent mother. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Ellis, called the court to order. The People versus Elena Brooks. Charges include second-degree murder through criminal neglect, child endangerment, and abandonment. How does the defendant plead? Elena's lawyer, a public defender named David Cho, stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution opened with a devastating presentation. Photos of Noah's body. The autopsy report detailing dehydration, starvation, and organ failure. Testimony from the medical examiner describing the slow, agonizing way a child dies when left without care. Marcus Reeves stood before the jury, his voice steady and cold. Noah Brooks was 3 years old. He couldn't walk. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't call for help. He depended entirely on his mother. And his mother chose to leave him. Not for an emergency. Not for work. But for pleasure. He pulled up Elena's social media photos, her laughing at the beach, holding cocktails, kissing Trey. These were taken while Noah was dying. While he called for his mother. While he suffered. The jury stared at the photos, some members visibly shaken. The defense tried a different angle. David Cho painted Elena as a victim, a woman manipulated by a predatory con man. He called psychologists who testified about coercive control, about how Trey had isolated Elena, convinced her she was worthless without him. Elena Brooks made a terrible mistake, David said during his opening statement. But she is not a murderer. She is a woman who was broken, manipulated, and led to believe that her son would be cared for. He called Mrs. Alvarez to the stand. Did Elena ask you to check on Noah? David asked. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, but I thought she meant just a quick look. I didn't know she'd be gone for days. Did you check on him? Mrs. Alvarez's voice cracked. No. I thought someone else was with him. I thought. She broke down, unable to continue. The courtroom was silent. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. Marcus Reeves called Detective Raymond Cole to the stand. Raymond described the scene, the smell, the stillness, the small body on the couch. In your professional opinion, Detective, did Elena Brooks know what would happen if she left her son alone? Raymond's answer was immediate. She knew. And she did it anyway. The trial became a battleground of morality. Was Elena evil? Or was she a victim herself, manipulated by a man who preyed on her vulnerabilities? The media debated. Social media exploded with opinions. Some called for the death penalty. Others demanded empathy. But in the end, the question wasn't about what Elena intended. It was about what she'd done. And what she'd done was let her son die. While Elena's trial dominated headlines, another story was quietly unraveling. Trey Lawson, real name Trevor Michael Lawson, had been on the run for 3 weeks when federal agents finally caught up with him in Nevada. He was using another stolen identity, staying at a budget motel under the name James Rivera. He'd already found his next target, a divorced woman in her 40s who worked as a nurse. He was 2 dates in when the FBI kicked down his door. Detective Raymond Cole flew out to interview him. The man he found sitting in the interrogation room bore little resemblance to the confident charmer from Elena's photos. Trey looked tired, his sharp jawline now shadowed with stubble. But his eyes still held that calculating gleam. "I want a lawyer," Trey said the moment Raymond sat down. "You'll get one," Raymond replied calmly. "But I thought you might want to know, Elena's facing life in prison. For something you convinced her to do." Trey's expression didn't change. "I didn't convince anyone to do anything." Raymond slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of text messages, financial records, and surveillance photos. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Raymond said. "Different women. Different cities. Always the same pattern. You find someone vulnerable. Someone lonely. You make them feel special. Then you drain them dry." Trey leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk on his lips. "I don't know what you're talking about." Raymond opened the folder and began laying out documents. Cincinnati, 2021. Sandra Hayes, 42. You convinced her to take out a loan for your business venture. She never saw the money again. You disappeared before she could report it. He laid out another document. Phoenix, 2022. Michelle Torres, 38. You moved into her apartment, racked up $15,000 in credit card debt in her name, then vanished. Trey's smirk faded slightly. St. Louis, 2023. Jennifer Kim, 41. You talked her into withdrawing her retirement savings. Said you'd invest it. She lost everything. Raymond leaned forward. You're not just a con man, Trey. You're a predator. You hunt for broken women and you destroy them. They made their own choices, Trey said coldly. Did they? Raymond's voice hardened. Or did you manipulate them into believing they had no other option but to trust you? Trey said nothing. Raymond pulled out one final document, a timeline. You met Elena on February 18th. By March 1st, she'd stopped attending Noah's medical appointments. By March 10th, she'd maxed out 2 credit cards, both used to pay for trips you planned. And on March 21st, you convinced her to leave her paralyzed son alone for 6 days. Trey's jaw tightened. I didn't tell her to leave her kid. No, Raymond agreed. You just made her believe that he didn't matter as much as you did. The room fell silent. Finally, Trey spoke, his voice flat. She wanted an escape. I gave her one. What she did with it isn't on me. Raymond stood, gathering his files. You're right about one thing. She made the choice. But you built the cage she was trying to escape from. And a child died because of it. Trey was eventually charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines. He faced decades in federal prison. But unlike Elena, he showed no remorse. No guilt. No recognition of the life lost because of his games. To him, Noah was just collateral damage in a con that went too far. The prosecution rested after 10 days of testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the texts, the timeline of neglect. Now it was the defense's turn. David Cho had one last card to play, Elena herself. Against his advice, Elena insisted on testifying. She wanted the jury to hear her side. To understand. David tried to warn her. They'll tear you apart up there. Reeves will make you relive every moment. Are you sure? Elena nodded, her voice hollow. I need them to know I'm not a monster. The courtroom fell silent as Elena took the stand. She wore a simple gray dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked like a ghost of the woman in those beach photos. Marcus Reeves approached slowly, like a predator circling wounded prey. Ms. Brooks, he began, his tone deceptively gentle. How long had you been planning to leave Noah alone? I wasn't planning it, Elena said quietly. It just happened. It just happened, Reeves repeated. You packed a suitcase. You made hotel reservations. You left food out for your son. But it just happened. Elena's hands trembled. I didn't plan for it to go the way it did. What did you plan? I thought someone would check on him. I thought he'd be okay. Reeves pulled out his phone. You sent one text to Mrs. Alvarez. What? And then you never followed up. You never called. You never verified. Why? Elena's voice cracked. I was scared too. I was scared that if I called, she'd tell me something was wrong, and I'd have to go back. And you didn't want to go back. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know how to anymore. Reeves moved closer. You posted 17 photos on social media during those 6 days. 17. Each one showed you smiling, laughing, enjoying yourself. Were you thinking about Noah in any of those moments? Elena covered her face with her hands. I tried not to. You tried not to think about your paralyzed son, alone in an apartment, unable to move, unable to call for help. I couldn't, Elena sobbed. I couldn't think about it because if I did, I'd have to face what I was doing. And what were you doing, Ms. Brooks? Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. I was choosing myself over him. I was choosing to feel alive over keeping him alive. The courtroom was silent. Reeves pressed on. Did Trey Lawson force you to stay at that hotel? No. Did he threaten you? No. Did he physically prevent you from leaving? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. No. Then why didn't you go home? Elena broke completely. Her shoulders shook as she cried, her words coming in gasps. Because I was scared. I was scared that if I left Trey, I'd go back to being nothing. Just Noah's mom. Just the woman whose life ended at 35 because of one car accident. I was scared that I'd never feel wanted again. She looked at the jury, her eyes pleading. I know how selfish that sounds. I know. But I was drowning. And Trey made me feel like I could breathe. So you let your son suffocate instead, Reeves said coldly. Elena crumpled. I didn't think he'd die. I swear. I thought he'd be uncomfortable. Maybe scared. But I didn't think. You didn't think, Reeves agreed. That's the problem, Ms. Brooks. You didn't think about Noah at all. He turned to the jury. She thought about herself, her needs, her desires, and a 3-year-old boy paid the price. David Cho tried to repair the damage during the redirect, asking Elena about the abuse she endured, the manipulation, and the way Trey had isolated her from friends and family. But the damage was done. The jury had heard Elena admit it in her own words. She chose herself over her son. And there was no coming back from that. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Elena sat at the defense table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. David Cho sat beside her, his expression grim. The judge addressed the jury. Have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes that now looked weary, stood. We have, Your Honor. In the case of the People versus Elena Brooks, on the charge of second-degree murder through criminal neglect, how do you find? Guilty. Elena gasped, her body folding forward as if she'd been struck. A sob tore from her throat. On the charge of child endangerment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of child abandonment, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some spectators cheered. Others wept. Journalists rushed to file their stories. Elena collapsed onto the table, her cries echoing through the room. David Cho placed a hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing he could say. Nothing that would change what had just happened. Judge Ellis banged her gavel. Order. Order in the court. The room gradually quieted. Ms. Brooks, the judge said, her voice heavy. You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. Sentencing will take place in 30 days. As bailiffs moved to escort Elena out, she turned toward the gallery. Her eyes found Mrs. Alvarez, who sat in the back row, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Elena mouthed. I'm so sorry. But Mrs. Alvarez looked away. Elena was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, her sobs fading as the doors closed behind her. Outside, reporters swarmed. The headline was already written, Guilty. Mother who abandoned paralyzed son to party convicted of murder. Detective Raymond Cole stood in the back of the courtroom, watching as the spectators filed out. He felt no satisfaction. No sense of victory. Justice had been served. But Noah was still gone. And no verdict would ever bring him back. 30 days later, Elena Brooks was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She'd cried herself out weeks ago. As she was led away, she looked one last time at the empty courtroom. Somewhere in that silence, she could still hear Noah's voice calling for her. But she'd never be able to answer. Prison became Elena's new reality. She was housed in a women's correctional facility 3 hours from the city where Noah died. Her days were monotonous. Wake at 6, breakfast in the cafeteria, assigned work duty, lunch, recreation, dinner, lights out at 9. Other inmates knew who she was. The story had been everywhere. And in prison, there's a hierarchy. Child killers occupy the lowest rung. Elena was threatened, spit on, shoved in hallways. She learned quickly to keep her head down, to speak to no one, to move through the facility like a shadow. But the worst punishment wasn't from the other inmates. It was from herself. Every night, alone in her cell, Elena would pull out a notebook. The pages were filled with letters. Letters to Noah that would never be sent because there was no one to send them to. Dear Noah, one read, I know you can't hear me. I know you're gone. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Another, today I saw a little boy in a wheelchair during visitation. He reminded me of you. I had to leave the room. And another, I dream about you every night. In my dreams, you can walk. You run to me and hug me and tell me you forgive me. But then I woke up. And I remember what I did. Elena refused visitors. Her few remaining friends tried to reach out, but she turned them all away. She didn't deserve their pity. She didn't deserve anything. Mrs. Alvarez came once. She sat in the visitation room for 30 minutes, waiting for Elena to appear. But Elena never showed. She couldn't face the woman who'd loved Noah, who'd brought him cookies and called him Little Prince. She couldn't face anyone who reminded her of the life she destroyed. Trey, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for his fraud schemes. He served his time in a facility across the country, thousands of miles from Elena. They never spoke again. Years later, when a journalist asked him about Noah's death, Trey shrugged. Tragic situation. But I wasn't the boy's parent. That was on her. He showed no remorse. No accountability. No recognition that his manipulation had played any role in a child's death. To him, Noah was a footnote, an unfortunate consequence of a con that went sideways. Noah's ashes were buried in a small community garden on the east side of the city. The plot was funded by donations from strangers, people who'd read about the case, who'd never met Noah but felt compelled to give him a resting place. A small headstone marked the spot. Noah Brooks. Beloved son. Your laughter will never be forgotten. On the anniversary of his death, people would leave flowers, teddy bears, handwritten notes from parents who couldn't imagine making the choice Elena had made. Mrs. Alvarez visited every week. She'd sit on the bench beside Noah's grave and talk to him, tell him about her day, about the weather, about the new family that moved into apartment 4B. I miss you, little prince, she'd whisper. I'm so sorry I didn't check on you. I'm so sorry. The guilt never left her either. Because the truth was, Noah's death wasn't just Elena's failure. It was a failure of everyone who could have intervened but didn't. Everyone who heard the cries and assumed someone else would help. Everyone who saw the warning signs and chose to look away. Noah died alone. But the weight of his death was carried by many. 5 years after Noah's death, the case still haunted those who remembered it. It became a cautionary tale told in parenting forums, in therapy sessions, in college criminology classes. A story about how loneliness can warp judgment, how desperation can lead to cruelty, how love, or the absence of it, can kill. Psychologists dissected Elena's choices, debating the line between mental illness and moral failure. Was she a victim of coercive control? Or was she simply a selfish woman who wanted freedom more than she wanted her son? The answer, as with most things, was complicated. Elena had been lonely, exhausted, manipulated by a man who preyed on her vulnerabilities. But she'd also made choices, conscious, deliberate choices, to prioritize her own desires over her son's life. Both things could be true. Detective Raymond Cole retired 2 years after the trial. He'd solved hundreds of cases in his career, brought dozens of killers to justice. But Noah's case stayed with him in a way the others didn't. He kept a photo of Noah on his desk, a picture taken before the accident when the boy was still able to walk. In the photo, Noah was laughing, his arms outstretched, running toward the camera. Raymond looked at that photo every day and wondered, what kind of mother sees that smile and chooses to walk away? He never found an answer that satisfied him. In prison, Elena continued writing letters. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The pages piled up in her cell, a mountain of apologies that no one would ever read. On Noah's birthday each year, she'd spend the entire day in silence, refusing food, refusing to speak. It was her own form of penance. But penance couldn't bring him back. The story eventually faded from headlines. New tragedies took its place. The world moved on. But for those who'd lived through it, Mrs. Alvarez, Detective Cole, the jury members who'd had to look at photos of a dead child, the memory remained. Because Noah's story asked a question that couldn't be ignored. How does love turn into neglect? How does a mother's touch become absent? How does devotion transform into abandonment? Elena once said she wanted a better life for her son. She'd sacrificed everything after the accident, her career, her social life, her identity, to care for him. But somewhere along the way, the weight of that sacrifice became unbearable. And when Trey offered her an escape, she took it. She chose 6 days of freedom over a lifetime of love. She chose to feel wanted over being needed. She chose herself. And Noah paid the price. The question that lingered, the question viewers and readers would debate long after the story ended, was this. Was it love that drove Elena to exhaustion? Or was it obligation dressed up as love, resentment masquerading as devotion? Did she ever truly love Noah? Or did she love the idea of being seen as a good mother more? And if she did love him, truly, deeply love him, how could she have left? How could she have heard his voice in her mind, calling for her, and chosen to stay away? The answer, perhaps, was simpler and more devastating than anyone wanted to admit. She was human, flawed, broken, selfish. She was a woman who craved connection so desperately that she sacrificed the one person who loved her unconditionally. She was a mother who forgot that being a parent isn't just about feeding and clothing and keeping a child alive. It's about showing up, even when you're tired, even when you're lonely, even when the weight feels unbearable. It's about choosing them, every single day. And Elena stopped choosing. Noah's voice called out in that apartment for days. He called for his mama. He waited for her to come through the door, to pick him up, to tell him everything would be okay. But she never came. And in the end, that silence, the silence of a mother who chose not to hear, was what killed him. The lesson left behind wasn't about manipulation or coercion. It wasn't about con men or cautionary tales. It was about responsibility, about the sacred weight of caring for someone who cannot care for themselves. It was about the truth that some choices can never be undone. Some mistakes can never be forgiven. Elena Brooks would spend the rest of her life writing letters to a son who would never read them. Trey Lawson would serve his time and likely find another vulnerable woman to exploit. Detective Raymond Cole would carry Noah's photo with him until the day he died. And Mrs. Alvarez would visit that small grave every week, leaving flowers for a little prince who deserved so much more than the world gave him. Noah Brooks was 3 years old when he died. He loved dinosaurs, and superheroes, and cartoons that played on a loop while he slowly faded away. He was paralyzed, but his spirit wasn't broken. He smiled. He laughed. He loved it. Until the day his mother chose to leave. And now, all that remains of him is a headstone in a community garden, a case file in a detective's archive, and a question that echoes through every parent's mind. Would you have stayed? Because in the end, that's the only question that matters. Elena didn't, and Noah died alone. If this story reminded you why truth matters, why justice matters, why every voice, even the smallest, deserves to be heard, then you're part of something bigger than just a viewer. You're a witness. Hit that subscribe button. Join the witness wall. Because here, no story is forgotten. No voice is left silent. And every truth, no matter how painful, deserves to be told.
Thanks for tuning in to The Witness Wall. If you're new to this channel, kindly like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.